I'd like to segue a bit because something you told me at the beginning that you co-founded and now co-chair the Vanderes Foundation. And given my background is in NFPs and charities as well, I'm really, really keen to hear about Vanderes' history and effective altruism. So I would really like to hear about your journey with Vanderes and how did effective altruism fit into that?
It was the wish of my late grandfather, or my ex-husband's late grandfather, to be completely correct, to set up a foundation as his legacy, focus on education, because his idea was that education can basically break the chain of poverty. And then we started to think, how can you create the biggest impact? Finally, we ended with funding either via loans or via investments of social entrepreneurs that were giving student financing to students in lower GDP countries. And whether there was like a student loan or a visa, which is a future income shared agreement. So you basically say, okay, I'm paying for your study. If you end up earning a lot of money, you'll pay back 5%, and if you earn a little money, you will still pay back only 5% of your salary. So they would never get into like a loan program after graduation. So we did that in Colombia, in Ghana, Myanmar, Philippines, Indonesia. And then after we felt like, hey, we figured this out, we know what we're doing, and we can open our foundation to raise more funds and increase our impact, I started to look into impact measurement. And that is a very complicated matter. That's why people are actually educated for this, to be able to do that, because it's nothing that you can just figure out from your kitchen table, I think. I was so intrigued by how the effective altruism community looks at impact. So it's a philosophy or a movement that came out of Oxford University and uses really like reason to think about impact. And I know the movement has had quite a bit of negative publicity in recent years. It's often seen as like cold-hearted philanthropy. But for me, to be honest, it is actually like you're taking out the ego. So it is not doing something because it makes you feel good or it makes somebody else feel good, but because you actually looked at it and thought about how can I make the biggest impact possible. So the idea is that the problems are big, solvable, and neglected, because your additional dollar will go a longer way if it's a neglected problem because nobody else focuses on it. We completely shifted our strategy. We still didn't want to give away everything in one go, because we believe that if we invest smart and we get returns, then over time, obviously, we will be able to give away more and therefore make more impact. So that is how we currently do it. So we use investor specialists who are trying to make our core capital grow as fast as it can. And then all those returns we give away, usually to the effective altruism funds, because those funds are run by people who are really scouting for the most effective interventions. And then we're looking at reducing suffering overall.
So that was fascinating. I'm sure you're aware that effective altruism is integral in helping at least one of our major advocacy groups on animal welfare in Australia. It seems to me that it would be pretty clear why they would choose an animal welfare group to put so much investment in, because the changes that we need to see happening in the world on this planet with human consumption and with the way we treat animals are integrally linked together, and you simply cannot do one without the other. And I must say, in my darker moments, I think it'll be pretty hard to envisage how we as a species can survive unless we address all three of those priorities. So I'm in love with effective altruism. They sound like an amazing organization. And for your Vanderes Foundation too, that is just the most heartwarming and wonderful explanation about an organization coming from startup into a maturity, having a very, very hard look at itself, a really close analysis of its own processes and its own output, and then coming to an agreement that you needed to change. Interesting, because I'm often asked about social impact and measuring impact, and the UN probably is one of the bodies, I would argue, that leads in that space in terms of research into current contemporary practice around that. outside of academic institutions. And I often refer people, I say, just go on the site and have a look at what the UN's doing this week. Mirte, I do have one special question that I'd like to ask before I say goodbye. If it was one superpower I could give you to support and advance your work, what you're really passionate about in this life, what would that be?
Good question again. I actually think it would be a photographic memory. Because by now we see so many reports coming out from the World Bank, from like a lot of like very credible organizations basically backing us up, right? But I would love to just be able to replicate all those numbers like this. Because when I'm talking to like government leaders, to philanthropists, it's just great to have all those numbers because they're so compelling. And if it's not just us saying this, independent organizations, well-respected organizations sharing these numbers of how alternative proteins is simply one of the best, most tractable solutions to get to a sustainable food system and reach the Paris climate goals. Because without alternative proteins, it's not going to happen. So I think that would be helpful in my negotiations.
Total recall, no problem. I will put the message through and we'll see if we can get you that. Trying to keep up with the pace of change is so challenging and somewhat distressing for us here in WA who are trying to work on change and keeping up with the agenda. Sometimes I think that the most important job that people like I can do is to try and open people's ears to what the facts are and what is coming so that they at least start to hear the conversations. You are amazing. Thank you for all you're doing with GFI and with the Vanderes Foundation. Surely your contribution will stand in the history books as something significant, not just for Singapore, but for the whole APAC region. I really look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. You're too kind.